Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Dr. A for History Surfer, and today I'm going to talk about early Christian art. For my art appreciation class, this comes right after the Roman period in art. So let's talk about what happened. By the time we get into the early Christian period, we're talking about a time when the Roman Empire had really begun to fail. In 285 CE, it was split in half by Diocletian into the eastern and western parts of the empire. With that happening, there were two main axes of control now, and the empire was really experiencing difficulties as far as government, but also other factors were affecting them. Depopulation of the countryside due to constant levying of troops, a growing urban population. It was wastefully managed in the farm areas, and there was also the decline of Hellenistic philosophy and the increase of other worldly religions from the East, like Christianity. Pressure from the outside barbaric tribes was also something that the Romans were dealing with. And so with all of this happening, we see in that context the rise of Christianity. So I've already mentioned that. Christianity was, remember, an Eastern tradition that was coming out of the East into Rome, and at the very beginning of its rise, it was persecuted by the Roman emperors because it was against everything that the Romans believed in. The Christians began preaching subversive elements such as the equality of all men, the community of goods, and the freeing of slaves. With that, the Romans were threatened, so they outlawed it. So the early Christians had to meet in secret. The empire looked like this at this point. If you can see here, let me just tilt that down a little bit. There you go. We have the eastern half of the empire over here, and the western half of the empire over here. The most pressure on the empire was coming from this region in here, where we have the barbarian tribes like the Saxons and the Goths, and of course the Visigoths and the Franks, and all of these different people pushing on the boundaries of the empire, and thus the need for constant troops. This decreased the population greatly. So now we have this introduction of a new religion, and it's a secret religion, and it appeals to a very specific portion of the population. From the list I just read you, the freeing of slaves, the community of goods, the equality of all men, it's obvious who this would have appealed to, and it would have been the poor and the slaves. And so it was a religion that really drew those portions of the population. These were people, oops, sorry, I hit the camera, who were illiterate. And so the early Christians had to battle the fact that they were fighting a way to pass the message along. And of course, the best thing that works is going to be art. Meeting in the underground catacombs of Rome, the early Christians saw secret meetings where they welcome these people, and they begin to instruct them, as I said, using art. If you've never heard of the term catacomb, the catacombs in Rome are where they buried people. And so we definitely, have a very secret spot that most people wouldn't want to go to, especially at night, right? And that's when most of the meetings were at nighttime. So if you look at a catacomb, and if you ever get to Rome, great place. And my other lectures, I talk about Rome all the time in the early, classical age. You can do catacomb tours. These were niches here that families owned, essentially, really rented in a way. And you can see here, it's a coffin. And they would keep their dead in here. You see that? So it would have been filled with dead bodies. And many people would not have ventured down here, but the Christians found it a protected spot to meet. They were teaching messages using images. But we see here a catacomb decorated in the Greco-Roman tradition by a fairly skilled artist, attracting the artists, the people that they did, the unskilled portion of the population, the illiterate. We're going to have waning of the Greco-Roman tradition in art. It's going to decline because they weren't taught it. All right, but you also now have to understand a shift in art. Whereas during Greece and Rome, the emphasis was on realism and trying to recreate the natural body, we're going to see a move away from that in art, because the idea was to emphasize the spiritual. It was a rejection of the imitation of reality. The interior life and world of a human was much more important than the exterior. So they taught these lessons and they preached the message, and they used images like these. And I don't know if you guys can figure out what this is, but it's supposed to represent fire. So the message here is, accept Christianity or burn in hell. The early Christians still borrowed themes from Greek images, such as the image of Hermes. He was the messenger of the gods, and he also guided souls to hell. He, though, became transferred into the Good Shepherd. And I showed you this here, the calf bearer from Greece earlier. Well, now he's going to be carrying a sheep. And so we see this emergence of the Good Shepherd as one of the depictions of Christ. Notice here in this early view of Christ that he has no beard. And so much like the people of the period, he will not be a bearded man. We won't see that until much later. Okay, it's going to eventually emerge. But early in the Christian period, he's youthful. And here he is being depicted as the Good Shepherd. First we see a goat, and then we see it turned into a lamb. So while there's no story per se about the Good Shepherd in the Bible, it's it's a story essentially. It's a parable. There's a message here that you're supposed to be learning. So as we move into the early Christian period, less and less of that Greco-Roman tradition will remain. Now it starts out, we see that youthful Christ figure being depicted quite naturally. We see the contrapposto stance, but it will, like I said, move away from reality. This image here, an early Christian piece, you can see that the sculptor has very little formal training. The arm's too big, and I always laugh when I see this one, because I don't know about you, but I have seen sheep, and I've never seen one with a tail like that. That's more like, I always think when I look at this, it looks like Lassie. So it's definitely not realistic, but also you have to remember that doesn't matter. That whole idea of it has to be realistic that point is moot right now. It's about the spiritual. It's about the message. Here, the Good Shepherd, and again, it's a very strange interpretation. I've never understood the mouth open like that. The sheep itself looks very, awkward here, but still, we get the idea. And look at how large the hand is. So we see a proportion issue. It's a lack of training. Christ's image, he appears as a young man living in the Roman Empire. That's would have been what they knew. So again, we don't see that bearded figure till later. It would be Constantine, the Emperor the Great. He's called Constantine the Great, the Emperor of Rome, who will grant toleration to the Christians. In 313, he grants toleration, and he makes Christianity a state religion. It was his mother who influenced Constantine. Was he a Christian? I get asked that question all the time. There's debate about that. Some people think he was, some people think he wasn't. I think what he was a product of his time. And we see a lot of syncretism there, a melding of Christianity and paganism. For instance, like the use of the date December 25th for Christmas. Christ was born probably in July, about July, August, they think. There's records that, verify what we believe is his birth. But December 25th was a pagan holiday. And so it's going to be used to convert people. Let's give them a holiday that's familiar, and they'll come to this new religion. Constantine's mother also persuaded him. Here he is in a big, giant, colossal statue that would have been of him. There's how big it was. You can see it was enormous. This is all that's left of it. All right, that's it. A kneecap, part of foot, and there in his hand. But Constantine was also persuaded by his mother to build the first large, or he was persuaded. And again, the story about his mother, some people say that's true, some people say it's not, but I think there's some truth in it, because the idea was to harbor a relic there. And I'll tell you what relics are. But he was the first person to build a large Christian church in Rome, and it was St. Peter's Basilica. The Basilican form had come to Christianity through Rome. And again, you have to have listened to other lectures prior to this to understand that. But a Basilican form was simply a large barn-like structure with a big interior space. There was a government building in Rome, and while the Romans had temples, the early Christians didn't want to adopt the temple form. They wanted something that was totally their own, so they adopted a Basilican form. They will add this forecourt here, and if you can do a cutaway of a basilica, you'll see it's got this large interior space called the nave, N-A-V as in Victor, V-E. So the nave and the side aisles here. Today we still have, traditional churches still use that same type of format. And so it's very traditional. But this church was built to house a relic, a piece of the one true cross. Relics were very popular, especially in the Middle Ages. And today there still are relics. I don't know if you've ever heard of this one as the most famous one. It's the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is probably the most famous and maybe even the most controversial. The church, doesn't like to date things, and it's been dated, and while the cloth seems authentic for the period, it would have been the shroud that Christ was wrapped in for his burial. The drawing on there doesn't, and that's why I say drawing, because that's what scholars have determined it is. It is not, it seems, the impression of Christ's body. But again, very controversial. But still, people revere it. It's in Milan in Italy. It's outside of Milan, actually, in Turin. And so you can still see these things. Very popular. So I'm going to stop this lecture here, and we'll continue on with Byzantine art after this.